The engines shuddered as the transport plane began its descent. Beyond the oval windows where cloud once filled the view, lights burst into being. Thousands of them sprawled across the black water like spilled jewels. General Heinrich Becker thought it must be an illusion, a trick of fatigue or propaganda. The Reich's leaflets had promised that America was collapsing under rationing and internal chaos, its cities dark and hollow, its people incapable of endurance. Yet below, in the sudden clarity of nightfall, San Francisco glowed without hesitation. From the DC-3's rickety cabin, the captured officers pressed their faces toward the glass, silent now. Market Street blazed into view, an incandescent river flowing straight to the bay. The Bay Bridge gleamed like an illuminated spine joining islands of light. In the harbor, yards of freighters and cranes shimmered, each spotlight cutting a square of brightness into the low fog. Impossible, Becker whispered. They waste power for beauty. The American escort seated opposite smiled faintly, misunderstanding his tone. Pretty sight, isn't it, General? Welcome to California. The words drifted through the engine hum, casual and devastating. Inside Germany, darkened cities meant survival. Light invited death. The officers had memorized blackout procedures, lived by them, fought for them. Now from 10 zeros, Aero 0FT over a foreign shore, the idea reversed itself. These streets glowed freely, a declaration of confidence, loud as gunfire. General Kurt L. Nerd dug out his notebook, hand trembling slightly, and scribbled a single line across its page. The enemy cities shine like constellations. Our propaganda men have never seen the night. The plane banked eastward. Below, headlights along the Embaradro arranged themselves in delicate order. Traffic flowing smoothly, unhurried. No rubble, no smoke. No rubble because there had never been invasion. No smoke because war seemed elsewhere and ocean away. When they touched down at the military airfield, floodlights turned the runway into a surface of tin. The generals blinked against the glare. Dozens of soldiers in khaki moved briskly about under the brightness. Mechanics, drivers, women in service uniforms finged documents. None seemed afraid of being seen. Becker, still half-dazed, murmured, "They live as though the war were finished." It wasn't contempt in his voice. It was envy. As trucks whisked them away from the runway, past warehouses humming with engines, they caught fragmentary sights through the open slats of the transport vehicle. Newspaper boys shouting headlines about the Pacific fighting. Women in hats laughing under neon signs. Cafes blooming with chatter, long past midnight. A red marquee rolled by Kite Theatre, Casablanca. Tonight, 8:00 p.m. The letters burned brighter than any street lamp in Hamburg. Becker couldn't help the bitter smile that rose to his lips. Even their theatres mocked his army's defeats. Yet it wasn't ridicule that stung, it was normally. The enemy had managed to wage total war while keeping its soul intact. When the convoy reached the ferry terminal, the harbour air smelled of salt and machine oil. Ferryboat horns moaned in the distance. Tugboats nudged lines of cargo vessels toward the open sea. Becker noticed automobile after automobile streaming across the pier, headlights flawless, paint gleaming. They were civilian cars, luxuries he had not seen in years. Beside him, Schreiber muttered, "Energy with no discipline becomes waste." Becker shook his head slowly, or proof they can afford to waste it. That single thought prosperity as excess burrowed deep. Later that night, when they were finally housed in a guarded barrack near the outskirts, Becker couldn't sleep. Through the small barred window, he could still see the glow to the west. It pulsed faintly through fog, a perpetual dawn over a country that had never faced true darkness. He wrote in the margin of his diary, captured by light more than by force. The journey that brought those German generals to the edge of the Pacific Ocean was measured not only in miles, but in disillusionment. In the spring of 1944, Allied intelligence began relocating senior Axis prisoners from Europe and North Africa to the United States. Officials had several reasons: security interrogation, and less openly to expose them to the industrial power they had dismissed as fantasy. The Americans called it orientation by observation. The Germans later described it as defeat in slow motion. Becker and his fellow officers, veterans of the Africa Corps and the Western Front, had been schooled in contempt. Party instructors lectured that America was a giant without soul, a land of consumer chaos where jars replaced discipline, wealth replaced courage, and racial mixture corroded unity. Even in Allied captivity, the myth persisted. They expected a rich but clumsy nation, a place soft with comfort, lacking the precision and austerity the Prussian mind demanded of greatness. In shipboard confinement, they repeated the same logic endlessly. A banker's war cannot outlast a soldier's. Then came New York's skyline. Even before the cross-country train reached California, the myth began to crumble. Dock cranes moved like mechanical giants. Skyscrapers, unscarred by bombing, glittered clean in the sun. The prisoners compared it mutely to Hamburg's smoldering skeleton, to Cologne's cathedrals, motionless in dust. When one officer dared to ask an American guard, "How many people live there?" the guard answered, 8 million, maybe more by next Thursday. The number sounded unserious, like boasting. But the view outside the train windows never seemed to end. Every few miles, another city appeared. Pittsburgh with black smoked mills, Chicago's skyline reflected in its river, Denver's rail yards crackling with sunlight. Each stop confirmed what their ideology could not contain, that the American economy had been at war for 3 years without starving its civilians or silencing its laughter. California in the 1940s was less a state than a promise under construction. Roads widened overnight. Factories grew faster than mapmakers could keep pace. Refugees from the Dust Bowl were now plant managers. Women who had never left farms ran Boeing assembly lines. To the Germans whose world ran on pedigree and ranked the sight of ordinary citizens building an empire of industry felt almost subversive. Riding from the dockyards into San Francisco proper, Becker noticed the absence of rubble. Every structure stood straight, shop windows shining, fruit stacked freely in markets. The war touches everyone, yet damns no one. He scribbled later, "It is as if they suffer prosperity." In Los Angeles, a few days afterward, their convoy paused at a refueling depot near Chinatown. Becker saw delivery trucks idling in line, factory whistles in synchrony, queues of men and women dressed cleanly, well-fed. Even gasoline was plentiful, colored red, labeled high-octane for victory. He thought of the ruins of Tunis, the endless short rations of Italy, the propaganda officer back home who swore the Allies were starving their own. Now he stared at a neon sign flickering outside the depot. Burgers, 15 cents open all night. It felt more heretical than Allied bombing, the American philosophy of excess. Behind their astonishment ran a subtler realization. This system worked precisely because it was undisciplined. The freedom to overproduce, to entertain, to consume all these impulses. The Reich labeled weakness had become the engine of power. Where Germans demanded scarcity as proof of virtue, Americans exalted abundance as proof of possibility. To Becker, the contradiction was maddening. He filled his journal with measurements, truck convoys per hour, cranes on the waterfront, but statistics couldn't explain how a people could laugh as they labored. Either they are blind to tragedy, he wrote, or they have mastered it. When night came and the prisoners were settled in a reception compound outside the city, the walls themselves seemed to hum. Low frequency from electric grids pulsed through concrete floors, vibrated coffee cups on metal racks. Becker described it as sleeping inside a machine still working. Guards joked with them good-naturedly. Food arrived on time, hot and plentiful. In the distance they could see the faint glow of downtown somewhere beyond barbed wire, trolleys still running, cinemas lit. For men educated in hierarchy, the idea that utility workers, jazz musicians and engineers all shared ownership of such brilliance felt morally bewildering. General Schreiber confessed under interrogation weeks later, "We believed efficiency could exist only under command, but here command obeys efficiency." The exposure was deliberate. American officers wanted prisoners to experience the United States not as ideology, but as geography, its space, its noise, its industry visible through train windows. Nothing else could communicate democratic power. So directly, the German diaries from that summer read almost alike. "Why didn't our intelligence warn us?" One wrote, "Had our leaders seen this, they might have reconsidered attacking gods." At dawn the following morning, their convoy left the military reception yard and drove straight into the heart of San Francisco. The rain had just stopped. The streets shone as though finished in steel. Cable cars clanged along Powell Street. Cafes steamed. Newsboys splashed through puddles, shouting headlines, "Europe burns, Allies advance," as if it were merely background noise. The Germans craned their necks at the skyline, climbing over the bay. Tower windows mirrored dawn light like thousands of eyes. Becker noticed something that troubled him more than the sheer size, the speed. Trucks rumbled in columns, repairmen climbed rooftops, milk wagons traced routes like precision drills. Yet nothing felt militarized, order without soldiers. A slender lieutenant beside him whispered, "Even a parade in Berlin never moved this efficiently." Their trucks crossed the Bay Bridge to Oakland for transfer. From the elevated roadway, the generals glimpsed the port below sea-dead planes, tanks rolling, entire ship holes under welding sparks. The bridge trembled under the weight of freight convoys. Its designed 2 decks of ceaseless motion seemed impossible to minds trained on resource scarcity. Schreiber tapped the steel railing near his seat. "Who commands this?" He asked the driver. The driver said, "Nobody, really. The bridge runs itself." The phrase stuck. For the rest of the trip, the officers repeated it like scripture. A bridge that runs itself. It meant industry without whip, patriotism without discipline. The nightmare and miracle combined. 2 days later, their transport arrived in Los Angeles. A sprawl so vast it appeared to leak into the desert. The highway descent revealed an ocean of roofs, smokestacks, billboards, and color. By 1944, Los Angeles was producing planes faster than Germany could destroy them. The generals didn't know the exact numbers, but they could see it. Assembly hangars stretching for miles, rail cars in constant motion, cranes biting the horizon. The convoy skirted the aircraft plants near Burbank. Floodlights burned white against morning haze. Behind chain fences, women in jumpsuits swarmed fuselage skeletons like mechanized insects. A scent of machine oil and oranges filled the air. Becker murmured, "In our empire, women knit uniforms. Here they build engines." The American major escorting them, unaware he was rewriting history, replied, "Why not? Somebody's got to keep us flying." By the time they hit downtown, the prisoners had run out of words. Radio towers rose from rooftops like antennae on some immense creature. Streetcars shrieked around corners wrapped in advertisements for heaters, coffee, and war bonds. The same democracy they had mocked as chaos was functioning like clockwork and made of light. At Union Station, the convoy paused to load supplies, parking near the main terminal. The Germans were granted 10-minute stretch under guard. Their boots echoed across terrazzo floors, polished enough to see their reflections. Civilian travelers hurried past uniforms, nurses, businessmen, black porters carrying luggage, children clutching comic books. Becker stood motionless, absorbing movement itself. Every face looked certain of destination. These people were not marching to orders, they were moving by will. The loudspeaker overhead announced departures, not decrees. Train 42 departing east platform. The phrase made him smile. Geography, not ideology. He thought of announcements back home. Commands barked toward survival. Here, travel was still possible. Choice was routine. Later in the interrogation summary, an American colonel noted his expression and wrote, "Subject displays fascination, not resentment at freedom of motion." That night they finally reached Camp Concho, a fenced world in the Texas outback. Rows of wooden barracks squatted beneath vast sky. The distance from the coast made imprisonment absolute. Yet none of them could stop talking about what they'd seen. In their mess the next morning, conversations overlapped. The height of the bridge, the film advertisements, the speed of the people. Their debate turned theological. Decadence, declared one colonel, all glitter, no soul. Becker countered quietly, "Perhaps abundance is their discipline." He didn't mean to defend democracy, but the words hung in the room like prophecy. For soldiers who had believed devotion demanded deprivation, America's casual luxury felt like religion inverted. Instead of commanding the masses to sacrifice, the system rewarded them for participating. Everyone became investor and beneficiary of victory. The more they discussed, the more the moral dichotomy blurred. Yes, Hitler built highways, but America filled hers with cars. The Reich promised unity. America delivered variety and somehow performance. Within weeks, the prison censor intercepted diary entries repeating the same astonishment. Schreiber wrote, "I wonder if these cities even know there's a war. They manufacture like a continent forging its own sun." Another's note read, "We memorized ruins, they memorized possibilities. US intelligence officers compiled these snippets, quietly satisfied. The mission had succeeded without gunfire. No ideology could survive exposure to neon proof. Yet for Becker, the revelation carried bitterness. Every night, beyond the wire, he could see the thin, luminous haze of nearby towns, Amarillo, Tucson, anonymous dots proving industrial reach. The hum left him more restless than captivity itself. He realized their empire had underestimated imagination, the ability to build, not as imitation of the past, but anticipation of tomorrow. When Germany finally collapsed in the spring of 1945, the news arrived not with gunfire, but through the same electric hum that had haunted the prisoners since their first night in America. The camp loudspeaker crackled, an American voice reading bulletins from overseas. Hitler dead, Berlin surrounded, surrender expected within days. Around Becker and the others, the desert wind barely stirred. The words sounded like a weather forecast. Defeat was expected, but hearing it spoken calmly without fury or triumph shocked them again. It was the language of a nation, certain enough of its future that even victory didn't demand shouting. That night the guards left the canteen radio on. Jazz floated over the fences. Becker sat on the barrack steps looking toward the faint glow on the horizon. He realized that somewhere beyond that line were the very cities that had undone their arrogance. The luminous places still humming, still alive, untouched by ruin. He wrote in his final diary entry, "They fought with freedom itself as energy." Months in captivity had stripped rank of its meaning, but the journey itself, those hours on bridges and boulevards, under skyscrapers and factory lights, remained a living classroom. The Americans had never tried to lecture them on democracy. They had simply shown it functioning noisily, imperfectly, without fear. In early summer, when they were finally permitted small privileges to work or study, Becker asked for books on engineering and city planning. He wanted to understand what he had seen, the logic beneath the chaos. He spent hours sketching street grids from memory, trying to capture how energy, commerce, and life intertwined like arteries and veins. Over the sketches, he wrote one phrase again and again, organization without tyranny. Schreiber spent his time walking the perimeter, speaking with guards about their homes. One farm boy from Kansas described how his town pulled money to build a power plant during the Depression. "We each owned a share," the boy said proudly, "still do." The general nodded, "So you create light together." He realized that this was what none of their theories had ever contained, collective ambition uncoerced by fear. Late 1946, long after the war's end, orders came to repatriate the remaining generals through New York. The trains carried them east across a country unscarred by occupation, planes rolling into city sprawl, factories converted again to peacetime production. The same system that had armed armies now built refrigerators, radios, cars. Freedom retold without pause. From the car window near Kansas City, Becker glimpsed a brand new neighborhood blooming from empty fields. Identical white houses, roofs catching mid-day sun, they multiply comfort, he said quietly. Someone behind him answered, "And call it liberty." 2 weeks later, the veterans of ruin reached New York Harbor. When the ship bearing them waited to depart, a fog settled over Manhattan, heavy but luminous from within. They could see the silhouette of the skyline rising through mist buildings stacked like the ribs of some great beast, lights blinking across their flanks. Becker removed his cap. "We were wrong," he said at last. "We thought cities were cages for the weak. They are hives for the capable." None of the men argued. Each stared upward as if memorizing the future. Years later, historians would call this the conversion of comparison, the process by which exposure to America's living abundance reshaped. Thinking of captured elites, interrogators noticed it quietly in their reports. Prisoners now refer to the enemy's success as inevitable, born of cultural habit rather than propaganda. But those records left out the poetry of what happened in their minds. Fear had been built on darkness. Realization came through illumination. When the transport liner eased from the pier, New York's skyline receded into cloud, its lights glimmering across the Atlantic like embers refusing to die. In his notebook, Becker wrote the last words he would ever pen on foreign soil. A civilization that can lose and rebuild within the same day cannot be conquered.